We're basically going to do a PowerPoint presentation on understanding biology and chemistry. We're going to start off with the basis today and let you understand some of the things that are represented on this PowerPoint, and then we'll take questions, and then also we're going to just start off with the basis of biology and what chemistry of life basically represents on our PowerPoint. Of course, biology, the word is broke down into a prefix and a suffix. Biology, of course, is your life, and then ology is the study of. So when we're looking at classes like immunology, that's the study of the immune system. Botany would be the study of plants. Histology would be the study of tissues, and so on. So these words are broke down into both a prefix and a suffix in order to give you a definition, therefore, of what's going on. And this is one of the starting points in biology that we will see. Next, we basically, whether we're talking about microbiology, botany, zoology, or immunology, these words represent something through their prefix and their suffix. Now, the question that I've arrived for you and that you'll see on my PowerPoints is I like to use Bloom's taxonomy words that basically give you a higher learning or a higher understanding and make you really have to dig down sometimes to answer things. So the question that I brought up for you would be describe the study of biology and what would it entail. So these different words, depending on their prefix and suffix, will basically entail the information that you will be studying for. What is chemistry? Chemistry is the study of matter and the composition and structure and properties of these agents and what we're working with in order to form other macromolecules in the body are formed, and some of these are due to how the chemistry basically can tie into one another. Next, in biology, we're always working with a hierarchy of life. We're always working with starting at the smallest thing, which would be an atom. And then, of course, atoms make molecules. Molecules make cells. Cells then will make tissues. Certain tissues will be tissue systems, which will then entail what type of organ we're working with. We're working with the digestive system, and of course, we're working with organs like the stomach and your basically your intestines. So these organs then will work into a body system, which then works into an organism. Then our organisms are made up of certain populations. So here we're using elephants. So our organism now, the population is the entire herd of elements. Now these populations live in a certain community. And it could be an African community where the elephants live, which will then encompass the trees, the grass, the land, the water, and all the animals that interact in this ecosystem, which is your last level between it and your biosphere. So these are things that when I'm asking you about a hierarchy of life, then whether it's from low to high we'll start with atoms, and of course we'll finish with biosphere. So make sure that you pay attention. When we're talking about hierarchies of life, you'll see this again in all your biology classes. So my question would be then to list the order of the following from low to high, and then I've given you an arrangement of these. Of course, if we're going from low to high, we would start with our atoms, and then our atoms will make cells, our cells will make organisms will then make a community, and then a community will finally make our ecosystem and then into a biosphere. So these are working with hierarchies. Now, there are basically two types of cells, and you should have seen this earlier in maybe high school biology or something, but there's two types of cells. We have prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Now, as we dive into cells later on in these lectures, then we'll learn our differences, but to give you some just right offhand is prokaryotic cells basically do not have a true nucleus. They basically have DNA that's loose. And these are your viruses that you're working with, bacteria and things like this. When we're talking about a eukaryotic cell, we're talking about animal and plant cells that generally have a definite cell wall or a cell membrane with nucleus and other organelles that work in interaction in these cells. So these are your prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. So these are definitely something that you would find on other MCATs, PCAT tests, generally any type of biology exit exam that you will take. you must know prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. A prokaryotic cell, once again, if we're talking about bacteria, we're talking about cyanobacteria, green algae, and these basically are unicellular organisms that lack the membrane bound nucleus. Of course, their RNA and DNA is loose in there, and they can usually be identified too because they generally have a lot of cilia and phalange, which are these tail-looking objects that you see. And we'll get more into this as we get into the cells and how cells works and their structure, and as we go on. Of course, a eukaryotic cell, we went over it. We have protozoa, fungi, plants, and animals. And these cells are basically have an enclosed plasma membrane or cell wall, and they also have a true nucleus. And these are one of the main things to look for whenever you're looking for the difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. So my question that I would derive from these slides would be, describe the difference between the eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells. Once again, we want to make sure that we're using these Bloom's taxonomy words in order to kind of give us a higher understanding of learning and thinking. Next, anytime we're messing with cells and atoms, we've got to talk about chemical formulas. Chemical formulas could be simply like H2O, water is a chemical formula. And they basically represent coefficients in molecules, what type of molecule I'm working with, and how many of each molecule and how they combine. So these are all depicted between their coefficients and their subscripts on how these molecules combine and what they can combine with depending on what type of charges, what type of bonds, or what type of chemical makeup that they may exist. So chemicals are going to be a very part of what we have in biology. And so what is a chemical formula would maybe be a question that I'd arise. So water, H2O, would be a chemical that we could use. And now water is one of the most basic, but yet without water there is no life. So sunlight with radiant energy, and between water we have no life. So water is one of the main issues that we are talking about. So with water, we want to talk about several things with water, and water can be very extensive. Water has lots of properties that exist that you will have to work with, whether we're talking about surface tension. In this picture, it shows a lot of what's going on. We have surface tension going on, we have cohesion going on, we have adhesion going on, and these are all the properties that we're talking about with water. So when we're talking about surface tension, you've seen spiders that walk on water. This is surface tension. Water also has a distinct chemical formula and distinct bonds. So with these bonds, depends on how we can connect with other micromolecules in order to form things that we need for our basis of life. So as we'll go through some of the things on water, and I'll point out things that you must know and must have, and that you'll see over and over again. Now the first thing that we'll talk about with water is they exist in four states of matter. They can exist as a solid, a liquid, or a gas. All right, now solid, liquid, and gas are our three states of matter that water exists in, and because of these, water has a very high specific basic heat, and so this is basically how we can get them from a solid to a liquid, because we have to have a specific heat, and we'll get more into it as we're going over water, with it being 1 gram per Celsius, and how these things are formed in gases and liquids and solids. All right, next we're talking about our chemical formula of water, which is H2O. And what this represents is that we have 2 hydrogens for every 1 oxygen. Now the reason is because of in order for, when you're working with the chemical formula, we want to make sure that both sides equal each other. So we've got 2 hydrogens on one side, we have to have 2 hydrogens on the other, and 1 oxygen. And we talk about how these combine through covalent bonds. All right, and so we will go more into this as we can. And next we talk about water as a universal solvent. This is one of the main things. When you make Kool-Aid, this is because water is a universal solvent. Because more substances are known to dissolve in water than any other substance that there is. And this is due because of water has extreme polarity. Water also has covalent bonds. As I just went over, we have covalent bonds, hydrogen bonds, and they create a type of polarity. So when we're talking about these different bonds, and we'll go over these different structures that have bonds, and we'll also be using some molecules that will basically represent chemical formulas and bonds. So if we were basically working with oxygen, then we've got one oxygen and two hydrogens. So we would have to take a chemical formula of water, which could be similar to this right here. So once again, we have one oxygen and we have our two hydrogens, and they are connected by a covalent bond. Now, water is also a bent structure, just like you will see here on this. It has generally between a 109.5 degree bend, and it's called a bent structure. So these are some of the things that we've had.